Right, that should be audible now, hopefully. Can't actually hear my own audio, so if you lose audio, do just tell me in the comments. Now, I know stuff's a bit upside down, but it's the only way I can get the webcam to work over the top of the rig and actually see what I'm doing. So I'm going to start off. First thing I've got to do is I've got to open this Alpha Trooper up and go and find out what's wrong with it. It's one of my regular players, and he had a breakage over the weekend whilst we were playing. It's a 5 kilo EAT. I suspect it's turned the catch inside out, but we'll just get it open and go see what's what. Hi, Jomo. Good to see you, buddy. And I can see Monkeytron are in there. And hello, Tactical Nerd. Good to see you. Jomo, I haven't forgotten about your blaster, mate. In fact, I've just been reviewing the shop. And as soon as I finish this next round of paint, I'm going to get onto yours. I've got a little bit of stuff to do first. I'm still thinking about getting it finished. But hopefully it won't be another year. I'm sorry you've had to wait so long. The wiring's all done on that blaster of yours. It's completely finished. The loom's all finished. It's just a shell that needs doing. Do pop me an email if you want to chat about it. If you've got any ideas about anything you want to incorporate that wasn't in the original design, now's your chance. So I just got to get higher foam blast. I can see the girls are there somewhere. So well done to Addy for getting on CNN. And Michelle, I hope you're feeling better. It's only Sunday lunchtime in America, so apologies for not having the best possible time for you guys. It's kind of, I think it's 12 o'clock PST at the moment, so I can't do it any later. But the camera seems to be working, which is good news. Hey, at least, Michelle, it's not a day when everyone should be working and like you feel you've got to get up. Sunday, lots of people have self-inflicted under the weather injuries and stay in bed all day. So staying in bed all day on Sunday is practically allowed. Even the most hard-working person will usually consider Sunday to be an off day. And if you didn't have anything really, really exciting planned, it's not quite the end of the world. It's a bummer when you've got something that you want to do, though. So I've been buried up to my eyeballs in various VW vans. That's one of the reasons why I haven't done so much Nerf stuff lately. It's because I've done a lot of van stuff. And both of those things take up time and they take up all my shop room. Oh, that's a bummer. Long term, being ill for a long time is horrible. And there goes that annoying little dart thing, the little dart holder. Every time I take an EAT or anything with that little dart thing in the handle apart, it always flies off somewhere. Oh yeah, and of course, Al, you had some EGR valve woes. Man, those things are so stupid. They're like the lamest thing ever invented. They're just designed to break. It's like a special part they put on diesel engines to make them screw themselves up. Learning how to take well, Al, is a really useful skill. If you can find someone to show you how to do it, or you can feel up to trying it, it's actually quite a useful thing to do, to learn how to do your own EGR valve. So we've got into the guts of this Alpha Trooper now. This has had a couple of catch problems, like they often do when they've got a 5 kilo in. And what's been happening is that I was trying to cock it the other day, and it was just not catching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the mainspring, and I want to watch what the action's doing with the mainspring removed. Now, if you've got a springer and you want to really see what it's doing, this is one of the best ways you can see how it all functions together. So I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to close the front part of the bolt. I just want to see whether it's going to catch. The tricky thing is holding the plunger tube at an angle where it doesn't get in the way of the... So otherwise, obviously, it all pops out when you try and do that otherwise. Catching on something somewhere. There we go. Right. Now let's see if it's going to engage the catch. Okay, so that's engaging the catch, which is good news. So obviously on the EAT, one of the things the EAT likes to do, if you've ever got one of these apart, you can see here, see this like little wasted bit on the catch. This is actually a remnant from the original Alpha Trooper, the really old one. Now, yeah, priming bars are a problem. That is very, very true. The problem is about making them thicker is that if you make them thicker, you reduce the space inside the shell and you also put more stress onto the bolt. I'll come to that in a minute because that's part of the problem I've had with this blaster. And I'll show you a trick I used to do that, to alter the priming stroke a little bit. So here, this is the cutout from the old reverse plunger in the original Alpha Trooper. It's one of the things that annoys me about the EAT. Is that when they designed it for direct plunger, they've left these cutouts, which are not necessary anymore. And actually, if they just made a solid side to this catch, it would work a lot better. But what happens is, as you put load onto the catch, at this point it flexes. And people have designed various things, and they've tried 3D printed ones and God knows what else. The bottom line is that you can't really make this strong. The cast Mazak ones that they sell with the Orange ModWorks kit are fine, but what they do have is they have a big molding line down both sides, and on the Mazak that wears away the inside of the shell here, and it also wears away the top of the plunger here. So what I'm now going to do is, I know that that's okay. What I want to do is I want to see what's going on with the plunger head, because if you have, sometimes you mushroom the plunger head, and I don't think that one's going to come out easily. Let's just have a look and see what's happening inside. Yeah, there's a bit of mushrooming in the head there. It's not really, really bad. We took the AR out of this one to make it a little bit more reliable. Sometimes when you pull these out of the back, you have to break the ring of adhesive on here. And you can see this has got quite a lot of glue on it. And I can't really be bothered to do that. I've got another one of these plunger tubes somewhere. But that looks okay. So I'll just put that back in. Always get those up the wrong way as well. I think it goes up that way, actually, with the little thing down. Right, I'll find out in a minute that it's upside down and everyone can laugh at me. Yeah, and I've seen those be turned inside out on the catches too. The catches have actually just been one of the common failures after several thousand shots with these is that this catch plate, this actually gets turned inside out. This bit just kind of bends over. This one's got a home spring, which is just made from a cut down longer spring, which isn't ideal, but it was the one I could get to fit really well. The downside about that is if you're unlucky, it pushes the catch at a really odd angle. And if you don't get it exactly right in the shell, it pushes the catch at a funny angle. So priming bar, I'll show you the problem with strengthening the priming bar and the reason why I don't think the blaster parts kit is the answer to this problem, because we can see whether there's any stress fracturing on the priming bar at the same time. It's always good to look at. So I'll take the breech out completely to do that, of course. Which is another annoying thing about the EAT. Don't worry, I caught that spring. So I can also check the dart gates working. They break here, the little dart gate. You can see there's a little bit of stress fracturing on the spring. The way to stop that happening is actually to remove the AR. It's one of the instances where AR removal is a good idea. And the EAT is one of them. Now this has got some super lube on the inside, so I'm just trying not to get too much of that on my fingers. Like Robin Williams says, it's fun if you're with a lady, lousy if you're in the jungle. So what we've got is here, where this screw goes over, the blaster parts one fills that a little bit more completely, but it's too thick here. So you have to take material away in this area. And then it also rubs through the shell here, and it makes it really hard to prime. It actually rubs onto this section, and you can see on this strike mark there, which is quite hard to see under my lighting, but I can see where the priming bar has been wearing away at the shell. And the blaster parts one in particular causes a lot of wear there. One thing you can do with this is you can unscrew it, you can take it out, and you can get a matte torch on it, and you can heat it cherry red, and you can quench it. So if you heat it up cherry red and then quench it a few times, you can get a bit more temper into it, because it does bend. And you can get a bit more tempering into it. And then the other thing that you can do is that you can fill this with resin. If you use like a slow set epoxy resin, scratch up the whole inside of that cavity and then fill it with slow set epoxy resin and screw it in and leave it for 24 hours. That stops it doing this, where it bends up and down. and that can give you a little bit more priming length. The other thing that you can do is that you can add material to the back edge, or you can pad out the plunger tube head to give yourself a little bit more priming length. And then you often have to rework this well. I often radius this part of the bolt here. This one's had a little bit of radiusing at the edges. And what that does is it helps the dart go cleanly into the bolt. And it means that you get less folded darts. So you can just open this area out to like a knife edge. And if you look on some of the newer blasters, they've actually got that. So I'm going to see whether that has fixed this, just getting a look at it and seeing whether it's going to line up. The other thing you do when you've got them apart is to replace the faux barrel with some just sort of fluted stuff or smooth. Because if you've got rifled, I always take it out. It's just an old habit from Couche days. And I don't think it does any harm to get rid of that just for reliability. I never liked that faux rifling. So you can see that's all operating nicely in the... And I've got to put the tooth back in and the tooth return spring and then the tooth retainer. I always get these up the wrong way too. I do so little springer work now, it's always hard to remember which way around they go. You can see the usual build-up of dart clag. In fact, I'm going to just get that, wipe it off. One good thing about wearing my workshop trousers, you can just wipe them off. Yeah, just chamfering the edge out. You're radiusing out, you just chamfer it back and then just chamfer it back and then smooth it. And you can use like a 240 grit for your shaping and then a 600 grit to really polish it. Yo, Adam, you can't get Couche. We were having this discussion the other day, actually, because Rab was saying that he really misses Couche for when he's doing like super semi-stock stuff. And a lot of the skate park games are still using a lot of stock blasters. My game still uses a lot of stock blasters. And all my stuff that I do for work, all the Nerf I do for work is pretty much 99% stock. Normally, I've got the only modded blaster in the room. And so, or, you know, even if I've just got like a spaced hammer shot, that's kind of as far as it gets. So for those sorts of jobs, Couche is actually a really good dart. And it actually works really well. This was the other thing that we used to have to do on the ATs, was mess with the timing of this to get them to load reliably. But that's less of a problem now. Generally, those... AccuFake darts are really solid. They do work really well. Right, let's put a bit more super lube onto the... I've got some in here somewhere. That's the stuff that I use, which is silicon PTFE lube. It's what we use in brake calipers and stuff. It's like a commercial silicon lube. And that's what I use on everything now. Don't use anything else. And just a little bit. The reason that I've got a small tube is because you don't need a lot. You just want a thin film. The beauty of that stuff is it's food grade and it's totally rubber safe. The downside about it is that it's death to paintwork. So if you're working on a blaster and then you're going to go and paint, wear a pair of blue gloves while you work on these or night trials or whatever you like. Wear your gloves and then throw the gloves away afterwards. I'm not painting today. I'm not painting tomorrow. Silicon will stay on your hands for up to a week. So if you're going to do any spray painting up afterwards, this stuff particularly is really good for getting on paint, and it will cause problems. So just bear that in mind. That even scrubbing it, normally you have to use like a really gritty, like workshop soap to get rid of silicon that actually basically scrubs off the first layer of skin. And then you can't handle anything that you're going to paint with fingers that have got gooey with silicon. So it's just one of those annoying things. I got other stuff to do. This is like my first stage. In fact, I'm going to have to stop and wash my hands between the first and third thing that I'm going to do today, because otherwise I will contaminate a blast that's not yet painted. And although I probably will wash it and wipe it over with anti-silicone, I'll make a start by giving my hands a quick scrub in a minute. So you'll have to bear with me because I have to go and turn the tap on. Now, this is just a standard 5 kilo spring, and I've found a few differences in these different ones, so I might try a different spring. Sometimes, if you change the spring, you can solve the problem. And just have a look and see what this bad boy's like. Now, it's a shorter one. You see, there's a slightly shorter one, and it's got a radius top. I don't even know where that came from, but that is slightly different. I don't know what that fits like in there. You don't really want any bag though. See, there's a bit of bag in, so that's probably not going to work. I don't even know where that's from. Just one that was in my box. I'll go see if there's another one. unscientific spring testing method, squeezing them. Always pays to label your springs. There's a longer one, that is. Now, I don't think having a longer spring will make a very good job in this particular effort, because if I put a longer spring in with less free space, when it's compressed, it will take up more space and it will cause more of a catch problem. So if this doesn't work, I'll need a shorter spring. Now, you can shim the back a little bit if you need a little bit to take out the tension, but I never do. Right, so first of all, I'm going to try the action before I get really carried away with being clever. Let's try the action and just see if it works. Why do they stick in the middle? That's what I want to know. I took all the locks out of this thing to stop it doing that. Now that's the full length of the prime. And it almost feels like there was something getting in the way of it sliding back and forth. I wonder if it had just got stuck. Now, it's another trick I do with springers. I leave the last couple of curls of the spring out the back so that you don't get any pre-compression. So if you leave that little last bit out, when you put the shell back together, you've not got any tension on it. And it just makes life a bit easier. And look, I remembered to put the little stupid dart holder back in. Right, I'm going to chance my arm now and see if it works. If it doesn't work, I'll work on it another time and I'll just mess with it. I thought, since everybody thinks that I'm only a flywheel person, I'd do a springer while I had one. Now you get to see me screwing things up, which is really boring. But hey ho, that's live streaming for you. So the next thing we're going to get onto is we're going to get on some bodywork if people want to see that. Yeah, not cramming your finger in is a really good idea. Yeah, Adam, I don't know how the hell you managed to mod springers, mate, because you've got a unique issue with eyesight, and like I struggle with the damn things when there's so many parts in. I remember when you did that Roto Fury, that's nothing short of genius. So you modding that Roto Fury, I've got pretty fair vision, and with my glasses on, it's perfect. And I really struggle with that thing. It took me about 3 days to get it to work, and you got one working. So I'll take my hat off to you for that. That is not an easy mod to do, and even with perfect eyesight. So well done, mate. That is impressive. At least with wiring, there's like less things to see. But there's a lot. When you think about mechanical complexity, there's quite a few moving parts in here. I mean, a Rapidstrike, you can count the number of moving parts basically on your fingers. There really isn't very much. Now, this is a brand new webcam, and I notice it's by and large focusing okay. If anyone sees any problems with it, then if you get the odd bit of flicker, what we're underneath is, if I show you, I don't know if I can change the camera right here. If anyone knows how you do that, then that would be good, because I can't see the camera settings from here. But because if I can switch to the other camera, you guys can see what I'm filming on. Everything's fuzzy. Oh yeah, it's gone fuzzy. Do you want me to just try and see if I can get it a little bit sharper? Hang on. Is that sharper yet? How's that? Has that gone sharper? Maybe when I move my hands in and out, it keeps trying to focus on what's in front of me. It's still better than the other camera that I have, because I don't have another webcam apart from the one on the laptop, and it's really bad. So it's slightly better when I take my hands away and it focuses. It's holding its focus then. It's when I keep coming in and changing the focus like that, it's going in and out, isn't it? Can you see it's changing? So it's like magic. Ha ha ha. There you go. You can focus on my hand up there. Maybe I'll move it in a little bit closer. I'll try having it a little bit further down. I just thought that gave the general view of the bench. It's the Microsoft one that was like recommended best cheap camera for streaming. And I didn't want to spend any money on this because I didn't think that I would make any money. So as I wasn't expecting to recoup my investment, I decided it would be easier just to buy a £10 second-hand Microsoft webcam and deal with that as and when. And it came with a mic. I've got a plug-in lav mic, but the mic on this is facing me at the moment. So hopefully I'm getting a relatively decent feed. Oh, I've not messed with an Artemis. I've left them well alone. I've never bothered opening rival springers because my game, you can't really mod them for my game. It makes them too powerful, and it's just not worth the hassle. So I haven't bothered opening any of those. I took one look at the internal pictures of the Artemis and just like, nah, not worth it. They also break as well, don't they, over time, those. They're quite bad for, I know a lot of the ones that we got for 5v5 and stuff that FDT bought for 5v5, a lot of them didn't last a very long time. I didn't leave back loose enough to get my spring in. To remember to get the spring tension right on the screws, just enough to, there we go. Get it in there. Right, we should be able to test it in a minute, or not. Let's go and see if it's going to catch. There we go, cool. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's working. I hate that noise. The AR-less noise. Well, that's good news. Might have just been scrapped for moving backwards. So there we go, success. It's the first thing fixed. So that's nearly a record. I've got stuff that I took apart to paint for customers longer ago than that. And I know there's a couple of people probably in the chat who are waiting for things from me who can say it takes me longer to mod than you. But that's got bad. 2018 is going back some now. That's pretty vintage. It's probably obsolete by now. Yeah, I do have a box upstairs of UFOs. There's unfinished objects. And there are a few of those. Well, I'm glad I didn't need to resort to my spares EAT because one of the guys at our game, his EAT jammed on him one time too many, and he'd had a long day at work. He decided that he'd had enough of it, so he used it on the concrete steps out the back as a bat and snapped the back of it for the poor EAT. But I salvaged a few things out of it. I got the plunger tube and stuff. Yeah, rapid pistols. It's funny you should mention rapid pistols because there's some rapid pistol related items in a minute. And I've just got to go and wash the remaining silicone off my hands very quickly. So you'll have to bear with me for 30 seconds. There are two things about to happen, actually. The first thing is that I'm going to probably open up something that I've not looked at yet, which Al will recognize the minute it comes on screen. Oh, Atlas. Yeah. No, I've not looked at those either. See, rapid pistols are another thing that seems to have fallen out of fashion now with auto Stryfes or with just generally with Stryfes becoming the thing and HPA becoming the thing. Rapid pistols are not so popular these days. I don't know why that is, but oh, Bobo's rapid pistol was really nice. The one, the pink glitter one came out very nice. He did a lovely job on that. Yes, Adam, I too have unjammed many Atlases. I'm sure you have too. Every kid going, yeah, damn, man, this is jammed. And they were on sale, weren't they, a while ago? And when they were on clearance, every kid and his dog got one for birthdays and stuff. And we spent about 3 months just clearing Atlas jams. But they're made much worse by aftermarket bowels. And I'm lucky. I've got no aftermarket in my pool. Right, let's see. Yeah, still working. Right, that's good news. So that's fixed. First thing's out of the way. Right, second thing. So the second thing we'll look at is, I'm going to get this out. There you go. Al will recognize this straight away because it's another one that came out of my UFO pile. So, regulator. I promised Al that I'd do a regulator, and I promised YouTube that I'd do a regulator rewire video at some point. And this rewire video is aimed at making it a job. It's not going to be like an Uber job. It's just about retaining the select fire mechanism and using one of our standard 3-amp buck jumpers to regulate the power supply to that to 6 volts. I might be able to push it a little bit, 6.6 maybe, so that it's a little bit more reliable and it keeps the stock feed speed. It won't go really fast. And because obviously we know the motor's in there is the pain, and when you speed up the belt, I don't think you really gain very much. This is really about making it just a fun blaster for use in 100 FPS games. And Al sent me some Rhino motors, and I like original Rhinos for 100 FPS because you can run them on 2S and then you can run them at 3S. If you, especially with full auto, sometimes running them at 3S is a good idea. So this will be a dual voltage build. It will have effect to feed the motors possibly, and then a separate circuit, completely separate circuit to do the regulator part. So I've got to work out what the hell's in there. The nice thing about these is that that's quite a nice sized battery tray once you cut all the stuff out, because it's a C-cell tray. So you can get like a nice square boxy 1300 3S in there, which gives you plenty of power and lasts a really long time. Mod these, because I guess because the circuit and it's a belt feed. Yeah, Helios is an interesting one. I don't have too many of those, thankfully. But yeah, those the aftermarket balls are really difficult. Well, that's the Greeks for you, see, along with A, because it's a Greek. It's one of those great Greek letters, isn't it, that does everything. Yeah, Al, I hadn't forgotten about it. I'd remembered I had it. It's just that I hadn't got it done. So these are good fun to use in different things because they're a bit of a giggle and you can lend them out to kids and you can do fun stuff with them. But they're hideous on C batteries. I mean, obviously you can do the quick and dirty mod to these by just literally taking the feed to the battery tray and sticking a LiPo connector on it and then running it. It would probably work on 2S. I don't know how the feed selector would cope with that, but it's not a massive voltage jump. I normally reckon on a 10% margin for error on stock electrics. And if you've got 10%, you shouldn't have a problem. But I don't know how fragile this is because I didn't pay any attention when everyone else was modding it. There was another one of those blasters that passed me by because I didn't really do much with the modulus line, to be fair. Since they just repeated themselves and they made Stryfes with add-ons, I had my Stryfe and that was that. I've never been inside one of these, so you're seeing genuine live modding. You can see live bewilderment at the same time. So that's what usually happens. That's why I started YouTube. Little known fact that I started YouTube not for the benefit of mankind or for my own glorification, but to remind me what the hell I was supposed to be doing every time I went inside a blaster. So the testing kind of happened as a byproduct of that because I thought to myself I needed to prove that what I was doing was making a difference to what was being done. And so I basically just looked for the Nerf equivalent of a dyno. And the Nerf equivalent of a dyno just happened to be a chronograph at that particular point in time. It was the only reliable measure of performance increase. And obviously now things have got a bit more sophisticated. And testing is a little bit less of a blunt instrument, but it's still fairly tied to muzzle velocity because you can't really prove that you've increased anything unless you've got some way of measuring something in a comparable way. Now, I don't think the orange part on this is molded to the white part, so I'm going to leave that alone because I will probably want to get into that separately. Now, modulus blasters are like that. They've got lots of things that have different colors on. I also noticed this has got like the more modern big screws, which is why I shifted to my other screwdriver because these bigger screws, they like the flatter head of my faith. This is the first screwdriver I bought for Nerf, and as you can see, it's been steadily eroded here. The grip is disappearing, and I'm now wearing the plastic away. So I use it to undo shell screws. Nerf Shack has a really cool little electric screwdriver, but the people who make it stopped making that particular one, which is very annoying. Like all these things, you find a tool that's going to work, and then some doofus decides to improve it, which gets very frustrating. It could be bonded into it. Let's see. If anyone's taken one of these apart. Well, yeah, Greg, there is that very much. Although precision isn't really a measure, accuracy and precision, because if you don't build precisely, you won't get accuracy because you won't be building to a tolerance. It's the same with performance in motorsport. You only really get reliable. You can get high performance, but you can't get high performance for very long. So if you don't build precisely, you don't get long-lasting performance. And I always try with my builds to get long-lasting performance. It doesn't always work, but there's a lot going on with this thing. There's loads in this thing. Now there's another screw that I didn't notice. That might help. Maybe I should do an English flag tied to a Saltaire on here, Al, in Candy. I might get it into trouble in its native land, but it's a collaboration. It's another blaster that when it came out, I couldn't afford to buy it. A couple of the kids have these actually at my regular game. They regularly annoy me with them too. They're always asking if I have batteries for them because, like all the C battery blasters, these things eat cells at a terrific rate. And it seems every kid that possesses one of these has always got flat batteries. I don't know if you guys have found that too at games, but it is one of those things that they just permanently have flat batteries. They're specially designed by Duracell to eat batteries. Right. So with these, the battery wires are coming up. So I've got a battery wire. So I'm guessing that's, oh yeah, okay. So there's the PTC. Okay. So the PTC is on the underside here. It's just attached to the underside of the shell. I'm just breaking that out a little bit so I can see what's going on. So if I push that out of the way now, you can see a bit more what's happening. So the trigger cluster itself is a separate molding, which is kind of similar to the other one. And then I'm guessing that over here, we've got, that's the LED. So the LED goes back to there. And then this looks like the board for the control of the feed mechanism. So that must be the board that I want to regulate. And I've got to see where the power goes for that. What's that up there? Is that oh, look, there's a little light there that tells you what's what. That's kind of cool. So I need to find where the power is in for this, which will be hopefully marked on the board. PA1, VDD, and that's the other one. Yeah, that's interesting. That is. That a lock switch down there. Yeah, that's interesting. So the trigger in this is dumb. It's a dumb trigger, and it just goes straight away to the front. I just thought I'd open this whilst people were here. I reckon, Al, it would work really well with a Worker Lightning stock, the shape of it. I reckon just a straight Worker Lightning stock in white would look pretty good against the stock one. Okay, so we've got the usual rev wiring. So it appears that that's kind of separated anyway. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the wires to the battery terminal because I don't need those. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be canny. I'm going to leave the polarity showing on the terminals. So I can then take the shell top away and then we'll be able to see what's going on. So when I get a blaster like this, the first job is to go and work out where everything goes and where all the wiring goes to and from and what's going where. And I can see with this that actually they've got quite a lot of it is preserved within this inside box. So obviously there's the motor for the feed motor, which is controlled by the microcontroller, which will be under here somewhere. Yeah, and it's probably on that board. Let's go and see if there's anything better on the board. Oh, there we go. BK and RD plus and negative. Let's have a look. Better be careful, I don't want to break any of the caps off. Hey, look, maybe I should hack all the resistors off. Right. Anybody remembers that mod? Okay. So there's the back of the PDB. There's nothing on the back here that's telling me anything useful. It's just all the components. Right. Okay. So bat, and there we go. So that might be what I'm looking for. There's a bat negative and bat. Yeah, there we go. Right. So what we've got, these are the two that I want. It says helpfully bat negative and bat positive. So that's the main battery feed. So that's where I'm going to want to integrate my circuit, my little feeder. Now, the problem I can foresee with this is actually, if you look at the inside of this part of the shell here, there's actually not a lot of room in here. Because of this fairing and stuff, there really isn't a lot of dead space in this blaster. So I'm probably going to have to put the MOSFET down here in this hole here underneath the trigger linkage, which is going to be interesting. It's going to have to be quite sneaky. And then I'm probably going to have to put the 3 amp power regulator up here, because obviously I've got to power this motor, which is just a crappy little motor, but the stock system on these is usually 60 watts, 5 amps at 6 volts. So what I'm expecting is that that's the peak load, by the way. Obviously, you never get 6 volts from 4C batteries. It's pretty much similar to a Rapidstrike in the motor load. There's the 2 in the cage and then the 1 on the pusher, but the 1 on the pusher here is operating the gearbox. So if I go with that and I just put the feed to that, I should have hopefully enough in 3 amps to give me a little bit of juice. So what I'll need to do next is I'll need to see whether putting the 3 amp power, putting the 6 volt power through that makes it work. And then I'll have to see about separating the power out. So that's that. And then obviously I've got my handy rev trigger wiring here, which I'll probably reuse because I'll be able to take that wherever that goes to. I'll be able to go and take that and run it. Yeah, there we go. Look, it goes up here. So there's the rev trigger wiring, which that might be an interlock. That might be one of these things where the rev trigger has to be on for it to work, which will be interesting. So I don't know how I'll get down the logic for that. If anyone's done one of these, if they can let me know what the logic is or where I can find it. So there's at least probably a rev trigger interlock on this, because obviously that's going into the board. And then there's one that's going to there's one that's going out here to that one. What's that one? BK and BK. That might be the motor braking and the logic circuit for that. It'll be interesting to see how much of this we have to separate off. So I think I'm going to probably save this for a time when I can sit and think, because you don't want to see me thinking, because that's a very boring process and it takes a very long time. So that was my thinking about the modulus. There's not really a lot of room in it. There is some space between the inner and the outer shell down the back in here, which we might be able to fool the webcam into looking at. Yeah, there you go. You can see there's a bit of space just down there between the shells on that inner part. Let's see if that'll go through. It might go through the hole. So in there, you can see a bit of dead space in behind where there's this grey shell. So the wires should all fit down there. So the motor wiring will definitely fit in that little gap. So that should give you, hopefully, with that nice big battery bay, I can always use, what I've done in the past is you can take, if you have a CPAC tray like this with a lot of room in it, what you can do is you can partition the end of tray off and just box it out, and you can put your MOSFET or any other electronics you need, you can put in there and then just have a plug on the back. So you can just use one of those 3-way motor plugs, or you can use an XT60, or you can use an XT3. For this kind of stuff, you're not talking about very high voltage, so it's easy to use those. Now that I'll be leaving this entirely alone. The trigger assembly won't get changed at all, because I'm keeping the stock rev switch. I'm not going to put comedy switch in there, and then I'll have the wiring. I'll just reuse the stock wire. So that's good news. So I'll leave that alone. So that should make it easy. Now what I'll do is, when I've done this, I'll post one of my standard mod videos, which will obviously be filmed on my better camera, and you'll get a nice, clear, crisp mod video of how that works. Now, if there's anything people want to see on the stream, do pop it in the page. So they F-Strike make a regulator board, do they? Right. What, they make one that just, do they have one that just plugs in? How does their board work? Yeah, shout about that. But obviously, if it doesn't work, it's kind of not worth knowing about, I suppose. I use the generic buck jumpers. I just buy the solar buck jumper converters, the ones that you can set the voltage output. Don't buy the ones which have the voltmeter on them, unless you're going to put it incorporated into the side of the shell to make the voltmeter at the same time. But it only shows you set it to, so they're not very useful. I just use my multimeter to set the volts, and then I just have it sticking out. Right, put the top back on the shell, and then we can put that back in the to-do pile, and I'll get through it, and then we'll do a mod video on it. So I'll try and get that in the next couple of months. I'll try and get that done before Foam Fest, because then I can save posting it to Al. Oh right, it's a solder-free board, so it just plugs in. Yeah, those don't always work very well. It's quite clever though. I wonder how they managed that then. I'll hand it to an F-Strike. They're annoying, but they've made it easier to buy things. If anyone remembers the hassle of going to buy China and going to try and find things and having to hope for the best and hope that it worked and it ripped off and not being able to use PayPal and having to risk your credit card and so I'm going to have to go and watch the Mighty Walrus Nerf. He's amazing. So I'll go and have a look at Wallcom's video at some point and then probably decide not to use that board. There's no point in putting it in if it just breaks. Oh yeah, AliExpress springs. Yeah, another old school problem. Well, I suppose you can get AliExpress still quite easily. That's always been fairly reasonable. But that's why I made those first motor videos. You kind of don't really need. People have asked me, did I want to do a 2020 motor video, and say, hey, you know, you should do a 2020 Nerf motor video guide. The thing is that like nearly all the Nerf motors are now good, aside from some of the obvious candidates that are too fast. There aren't really any bad motors as such. If you buy from, you know, the big retailers like Foam Blast and from Luca out of Darts and Containment Crew and all those kind of people, yeah, all the motors that the communities had made have all been really good. There haven't been any that were really bad. So it's down to personal preference then. Whereas in the old days, you could have motors that just flat out didn't work, or you put them in and they lasted 30 seconds and then they died. So now, even if you buy those really bad artifact motors, or you know some of the other ones that were less good quality, even the ones that come with the worker metal cage and stuff, they actually do work. They will give you power. They won't give you the best power, but they'll give you power, and you'll certainly get an improvement over what was in its stock. So it's kind of yeah. Does X motor work? Was the biggest question, and that used to be on Reddit all the time, and I know that Andrew, aka SSGT, he kept his motor spreadsheet up to date. It used to be a nightmare for him because every week someone would find a new motor and he'd have to go and dig out the spreadsheet and then work on the specs and try and make sure that he had it correct so that his information was good. But yeah, that's much less of a problem now. It's just about which voltage you want to play with, really. I'm going to take 30 seconds to wash my hands now before I touch the next thing because I've got to paint the next thing. So I'm just going to make sure that I got the silicone off my fingers a degree, and then I'll come whizzing straight back. And what I'll do is I'll put the next thing onto the table so that you can all look at it whilst I quickly wash my hands before I go again. And I'll pick it up with something else. I'll pick it up with some sandpaper. That hasn't silicone. Right. So we've got that next. All color schemes are always tricky. I tend to just go with if it's extremely sparkly and covered in flames, skulls, and/or gold metal and/or metal flake of some kind. It's good. I've got peculiar taste. So this is a blaster that I've been building for my son for about 2.5 years, and it is a Rapidstrike SMG. It's a bit like the one that Alice did, that we worked on together for her, the red one that she demonstrated a while ago. I think she had it on her channel. except this one doesn't have a 3D printed flat top kit. It has one of my chop top flat top kits that I make out of PVC sheet. And what I was going to do with this today was I was going to show people how I prep stuff and get stuff ready to fill. And the other thing I'm going to do in a minute as well is I'm going to show you guys how I make these triggers. Now, remember those metal Stryfe triggers that everyone was raving about? Oh, I'm going to give a metal Stryfe trigger. It looks like a real gun. And I do my cutout ones where I cut out this little section here. So I marked this one up. I thought I'd show you guys how to make these in like 5 seconds for me, because they're good too. With this one, if you guys want to think about which order do we want to do? Do you want to do a quick and dirty trigger mod and then look at the sanding, or do you want to look at the sanding and then a quick and dirty trigger mod? So if anybody's got any preference, stick it up in there. Otherwise, I think I'll do the quick and dirty trigger ones first. It's always the best thing to send the new guy to stores to ask for the tartan paint. So if I show people how this comes apart, as you can see, I haven't trimmed back this metal. Trigger first. Okay, so it's 1 vote for trigger first. Here's my immensely scientific collection of screwdriver bits, aka all stuffed in a bag. Somewhere I've got a set that's all nicely organized, but I couldn't find them because I was too disorganized. Go figure. Old clan tartans, and there's a bit of controversy about some of those because a lot of them were invented by the Victorians, weren't they? I suspect that many of the clansmen couldn't afford to have their own tartan made. It was just whatever tartan was made most nearby. But people do like their clan tartans. There we go. Right. So we'll just change over. I'll just show you guys how this comes apart first. I don't know if there's a page tartan, Adam. If there is, it's probably really, really complicated. All the Scottish tartans that you see today, 90% of them were invented in the Victorian era to cash in on the Highland mania started by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, who, a bit like Meghan and Harry going to Canada and then America, they went to Balmoral instead, and they discovered Scotland, and that was their thing. And everybody went nutty for Highland dress. And obviously, Victoria helpfully remodeled the Scottish regiments again and gave them more Highland things. And that's where a lot of the tartans allegedly come from. But I'm no expert. So this you can see. I'll move it where you can see it. Right, there we go. I'll wait for the camera. So this you can see is my standard 2-part flat top. And the way these are made is that there is a single plate on the top, down which is the center line. And then I've got these inset screw inserts. I've changed the way I do these now. I've got a new version of these. But what these are is they're an 8mm threaded insert that you screw in from underneath. And also, I imagine that if you were a proper clansman, you couldn't really see what colour your tartan was because it was covered in the blood of your enemies. And blood of your enemies was the most common tartan colour for a true clansman, especially during the era of the. And in that case, then, or the blood of the English was also the common colour of the clansman's tartan, depending on how angry they were. Yeah, Nathan, these start off as just flat PVC. And the way that I make them is I take them into the fab shop and I use the 20-ton shear that they have in the fab shop to cut the strips. And what I do is I mark them all off and then the CNC machine cuts them, but I number the strips so that when they come off the shear, each one shears slightly differently because it's not designed to cut plastic, it's designed to cut metal. So what it does is it cuts through and then the bottom half breaks. So when you do it that way, if you number each of the strips, when you then want to have a dividing that you'll see in a minute, that this top plate comes off. When you want to have this join here along the top, it means that you get a flawless partition down because the shear cuts it perfect. And that's the sheared edge. And so they match up. And then when you take them apart, they match completely perfectly, which is fun to do. But it's immensely satisfying. Using the 20-ton shear is wicked. I used to use it for work. And it is great fun because it makes this wonderful noise. It's a compressed air one, and it kind of makes this enormous clanging chuff noise, and it comes down. It makes your fingers tingle every time you use it because you know it would take your hand if you weren't obeying the rules and keeping the guards. And I used to do the maintenance on that, and every couple of years we'd have to change the blades for reground ones, and the shear blades are quite something. When they come in the packaging, they kind of radiate sharp, although they're square, not a blade. You imagine this thing's got a bed of about, I think it's over 8 feet long. I think it's a 10-foot bed. And it is a big bed, and you get this massive long blade, and it comes wrapped up in this special protective stuff and a case and things. And you unwrap it, and you can feel the sharpness coming off it. You have to wear gloves when you handle them because they've got such sharp corners that they'll actually cut you if you touch them wrongly. And you have to lift them into place, and then you have to bolt them up, and you have to tension all the bolts to the correct torque, and then you have to put feeler gauges between the two blades and set the blade gap. So, yeah, that's pretty much how it goes together. And then, obviously, it's Devcon bonded inside to the shell. And I just cut the shell using you can use a flat saw if you've got a fancy power saw. I've got a saw that I use. And then you can see here that you get this line. So what I'm going to do today in a minute is I'll show you how I work these corners out. And I'll also show you how I work out on the shaping. What I do is I put all this as one piece. I put the flat top as one piece, and I work on it as one piece, so that when it's finished, when I separate it, the fill lines and the sanding lines are all integrated and it disappears. So I'll show you that in a minute. So I'll put that to one side, and we'll do the quick and dirty trigger, and then we'll come back to shell prep. And I'll just run a bit of shell prep on there. I told my son I'd try and get it painted and stuff, so I've been loading the gun a lot lately. So for these, all you need to make these is you need one of these. This is my favorite piece of sawing equipment, and this is a jeweler's piercing saw. And this one's got a silver work. For plastic, it doesn't matter. Generally, for plastic, you want a bit of a coarser tooth pitch than is on here, because this looks like wire when you look at it. These are between £5 and £25. You can get very, very nice precision-made ones that cost a fortune. But if you're just hacking plastic, the cheap ones, the ones that are easier to work with, are the ones with a little screw tensioner in the blade. So you just turn them like a fret saw. Right, the flywheel motor combo. What I'm really cheap, I'm notoriously cheap for flywheels. I only ever buy aftermarket wheels if I'm making a 130 plus setup, and I always buy Bulldogs because they're available in the UK. And Kev and I worked on the very, very first prototype wheels together. We kind of brainstormed out a lot of the bits and pieces, and then he did all the development work. He paid for all the work. He got all the samples. He made them all up, and he actually got them made, where all I did was talk shit about them. So, hats off to Kev. And I think that we need to support our domestic modding industry as much as possible, because it funds further development. And also, every time you spend money at UK NERFL, you're pretty much funding more hobby stuff. So what I do is I make use of this existing hole to start my cut, because there's no point in drilling a hole. And then you put the blade, you undo the blade. And the annoying thing about this one is you have to tension the blade manually. So what I tend to do is I tend to put it on the table and push it down, but I'll push it against my chest bone in a minute and then tighten it up. And you can use a pair of pliers. I just keep a pair of pliers to just nip up the end wheel like that, because I'm old and my grip strength sucks. So then what you're going to do, the beauty of this saw is it's like a wood fret saw in that it's really maneuverable, and you can get it right into corners and stuff. It's going to be quite hard to actually saw and show you at the same time, but I'll see what I can do. So what I do is I just work the saw gently, and you go very slowly with this, and you don't go right through the line. And you just work the blade. I'll work the blade into the corner first, and then I'll come back round, because it's very hard to do a complete 360 with a fret saw blade. There we go. So what you have to do when you want to turn the blade is you have to move the blade a bit at a time to move it. You have to use the teeth to turn the blade. And what I do is I don't cut to the line. I cut like around the line. So I'll go fairly close. I'll just bring it up, see if it'll pick it up. Right, I'm going to go as close to the camera as I can. I can't, unfortunately, look down the lens of the camera while I cut. You can put this in a bench vise, and you can eyeball it through a bench vise. That's quite good too. This is like my roughing out cut anyway. Because what I tend to do with these is I carefully file them to shape when I'm finished. using my hand files, and then I'll also emery cloth them down, and then I'll repolish them, because I tend not to paint my triggers. First of all, your hand's going to be on it all the time, so you won't see it even if it's a different color. And second of all, it's another one of those things where the more orange you've got, the better. And I always think that anything that makes it look less like a firearm is a good thing. For most playing spaces, you want people to be able to use their stuff wherever. You don't want to have stuff that you can't use at 90% of games because it's a dumb color. So if people want to paint triggers, they can, but I kind of don't see the point. It only wears off. It's the primary means of tagging people. So yeah, flywheel cages, I always go with stock cages unless I'm building over 130, because the stock cage is free, and 9 times out of 10, it's okay. I'm not convinced by ultra concavity. I know people go on about ultra concavity, but accuracy is pretty much a function of the dart you use and the velocity matching to the dart you use, and then how carefully you put it together. I know that some people go on about ultra concave wheels, yada, 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 but for me, I found that the balance and the machining tolerances of a really well set up machine wheel are still good enough. I think to talk about accuracy in Nerf is kind of counterproductive to me. I like the fact that it's not 100%. In fact, airsoft isn't 100% either. Airsoft is not a precise art. It can be made more precise, but you're still using a smooth ball type projectile in a barrel with a bit of windage in it. But for me, a slight degree of inaccuracy is part of the fun of Nerf. If I wanted to just go and shoot everybody from a 500 yards away, I'd go and do laser tag with a really high focused laser emitter, and or go and do another tagging sport. I think that sometimes the fact that Nerf doesn't 100% of the time go where 100% of the places you point it makes it more fun, and because you get those amusing things where you think you've got this kid lined up, and you think you've got this kid lined up, and you're going to nail some little kid that's way down range of you. You've got your nice, really nice, expensive modded blaster, and you set up the shot and you shoot at him and nothing happens, or he misses. The first shot misses and he ducks out of the way, and then he pops up with a stock jolt and nails you. And that to me is part of the fun of doing Nerf, is there is no pay to win involved in some respects. There's quite a degree of luck, and that's fun. And you can take some of the luck away, obviously, and min-max players tend to like doing that. And I don't mind people being careful, and if you're spending a lot of money, you want to make sure that it's coming out nicely, but at the same time, a degree of inaccuracy, I think, is part of the charm. And 100 FPS with AccuFates is going to be pretty much as good as you're going to get consistency-wise with a full-length dart, because it's just the sweet spot. So there's 100 FPS games, although some people say that they're a bit slow, they're actually quite a good leveler as well, because at 100 FPS, you haven't got enough of an advantage in modded. At 130, you definitely have. So there you can see the roughed out trigger. And you can see I haven't gone all the way up to the edge. That's left me close to the edge. And now what I do is I go to my first strike weapon of choice, which is just one of these. This is a really cheap and nasty hand file that I bought in a set off eBay because I kept stealing the metalwork ones. And the guys in the shop were shouting at me for me nicking their files. So I had to buy my own, and I didn't want to buy expensive ones because they only get full of plastic. So this is just a cheap set off eBay. And then all I do is I'll work the shape now till I'm up to the edge, almost to the line. You've got to be a bit careful that you don't take too much meat off, and also that you don't scratch the trigger too much. Because if you're keeping it orange, I know that sounds kind of great, isn't it? It's kind of like doing teeth. There we go. I'll lift it up. So it's a bit like, when you use the hand file, it is a bit like that kind of noise that sets your teeth on edge, running your fingers down a blackboard. You have to watch out with your file that you don't file it to make it too wonky. You've got to keep the file fairly flat. Yeah, carding plastic out of files sucks. Yeah, that does suck. That's why I tend to only use the coarser files on plastic. I think it's better in many ways to use a sandpaper on plastic after the first cut. Because with this file, it's not so bad. You can just use it. I use a wire brush for that, and it normally comes out all right, and you can get the worst of it off. But yeah, it is a pain getting them otherwise. It's not as bad as white metal. That really sucks. There's no easy way of getting white metal off files at all. You have to have a set for white metal and a set for other things, because you can't have a set for both. If you either, white metal really clogs things up. So we're nearly there now. Just going down to close to the line again. First cut doesn't have to be massively harsh. And what I'm doing is I'm leaving these bits which are thin. I don't want to attack these with quite such an abrasive file. I'll probably switch to a slightly smaller file in a minute for those, because that's another thing you don't want to do, is cut through too much meat on your first cut. I'll take the corners with this file because those I can get down. This feels ridiculously small compared to what I've been working on this month. Yes, I've done many white metal. I grew up with white metal GW. I started doing 40K in about 1989, 88, 89, and I've got still somewhere some of the first edition bits and pieces that I bought when I was a kid. In fact, you might be able to see some horrible white metal stuck in here. I still do white metal soldering from time to time, and I make white metal. Trying to find a flat file in my very disorganized toolbox. There it is. Here we can see a typical crappy modeler's file. It started off life as a fairly inexpensive needle stuff or millipart it's wedged in. There's a little bit of white metal in there, and on this side there's a clear piece of white metal right in the middle where there's silver. That silver stuff is just crappy, and that is always really hard to get out. So I've got those, and this is my file that I use for doing all of those little cutouts that I put voltmeters in. It's my voltmeter cutout file because it's quite a good size. So I've just got to dress up to the line at the bottom now, and then I'll smooth off the corners with a round file in a minute. That's pretty straight. Filing is really boring. I know I could do this with like in 5 seconds with a Dremel, but the big problem with Dremel is it completely covers all of my kitchen in like crappy plastic dust. And we're actually in my kitchen. This is where all my modding gets done, because I can't mod in my workshop because this time of year it's too cold and too wet. And it's really boring being stuck up there for hours on end away from the kids and the family and stuff. It kind of seems, I'll do it when I've had enough and I want to go and hide, or if I've got something that I can't do at home, like you really can't do welding and grinding and all of those sorts of things. They don't work well in a domestic environment. So those sorts of things I'll go and do in the shop. But if I can do it in the shop, if I can do it here, it seems to be stupid to go all the way to the shop to do it. So I tend to do all these mods here. And I do like hand tools. So there's much more control versus a Dremel. And the best Dremels, yeah, you can run them slow, but you still haven't got the same level of precision and control as you have in a hand tool. And also they make more mess. And I find that I break them at inopportune moments, like right when I've got a commission to finish and I'm in a real hurry. That's when I always have a power tool breakdown. The only power tool I've really liked, actually, that I didn't know I needed, was I bought one of those vibrating saws because I needed to do some work on my house. I had a whole load of lock cutouts to do, and I couldn't be asked, and I had crap chisels, so I bought a vibro saw to do the lock cutouts. So what I've done now is I've got that quick and dirty trigger now that pretty much shaped out. So that's looking pretty tidy now, and I'm going to thicken this up a little bit versus my line, because actually that'll leave me with too little meat in it and it'll bend. And the next thing to go on to is this is a, I don't know, looks like a 240. Yeah, it's a 240 grit paper. And then what I'll do is if I'm doing straight corners, I'll just wrap it round a former like that. So that's actually an old nail file, and you can use nail files too. And there are things called sanding sticks. If you're an old-fashioned modeler, you'll be aware of those. And sanding sticks are useful because you can get them in different shapes, and they'll hold. I use those to go onto curves, but I'm just going to use this to give the paper a little bit of rigidity while I go in and just do all that. And then it'll be ready for polishing up after that. So what I want to do now is just round, and this is like the kind of final finessing with the 240, and then you can go to 600 afterwards to really polish it if you want to, but I don't think I'm going to need to with this. What I'm going to do is I've got to round off this back edge here to get it all like that so that it's nice and tidy. And again, when you use a former, you're not relying on your big sausage fingers. You can make it into a little wedge to get in the corners, and you keep the pressure even on the paper, and it makes for a much, much better job. There's times when you want to use your finger, but also if you're going into rounds, you can use a round former. There's a good use for a piece of leftover Stryfe barrel. You can wrap the tape around it, and then you can get a nice circle. If it's a tighter circle, you can use a tighter circle. So like I got an old solder tube, and then you can wrap round, and you can use that, or you can also use the back of a half round file. You can wrap in paper and get in too, which is quite a handy way of doing it. So I always like to use a former when I'm doing sanding work because, or a block. And I've got these things called Dura blocks for the workshop, which are like a rubber block that holds any sandpaper, and they come in different lengths and sizes, and they're rubberized, like heavy duty rubberized foam. And what those do is they even the pressure out, and you get a really nice clean sand. You don't leave finger marks in your sanding. And I try to do the same with the Nerf stuff. And when I come to block that Rapidstrike, you'll see how I do that. I do the same with that. So the first strike I'll do with the file just to get the shape right, and then I'll go down to a 120 grit for the majority of my shaping and filler prep. And then I'll do a final sand in wet 240. And if there's areas that I'm not painting, I'll key those, and I'll show you how I do that in a minute. So I've got some of my other sanding tricks in the bag for later. Now I'm only going on to 9:30 GMT tonight because I haven't got a lot of stuff to put in this time. But when I've got that, regulator worked out, I might do that as a live stream, or I'll live stream something else. In a minute, I might do a little sneak peek. I'll see if I can be bothered to go and dig something out. Some people will have seen it already, but I don't know how good it'll look under this light. But it's a project for a customer that I'm hoping to ship this month. And they haven't seen it yet, but I'll give you guys who've stuck with my tedious live stream a little sneak peek at it. You won't see the main body of the blaster because I have a strict no peeking rule about that, but I'll show you one of the accessories. Look at it from one angle, it's pink, and when the sun catches it, it actually makes rainbow sparkles on it. It's so hard to photograph those kinds of things because they just don't show in ordinary light. You really need sunlight, and you have to get the sunlight angle right. It's very difficult to photograph. A lot of that's a 3-stage flake, so it's got a sparkle base like those candies. I notice a lot of people have been using the candy in cans lately to good effect on Brit Nerf, which has cheered me no end. I love to see those kind of jobs because it's clever and it's quite hard to do. And yeah, you put the sparkle base on, and then now I'm going to need to get a bit of a curve on. I'm just going to fold it into a corner just to get into the corner there and just deburr that corner. So sometimes the radius is so tight that you can't really get a tool in there, and that's when you can use the paper on its own just to get a little radius going. So that is now pretty much ready, and when you put that into the body of a Stryfe, you don't see the edge hardly at all, and you see the cutout. So I reckon that looks easily as good. Now what we're going to do is just quickly polish this, and I'll show you how I do that in a second. I'll do that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And all I used for that tool was £5, and that came with blades and then time. So if you want to make your own unique triggers, you can also do different designs. So you wouldn't actually necessarily just have to do a boring half moon in there. There's nothing to stop you from stenciling something into the back of that and then cutting out the stencil. It's more difficult to do, but you can do it if you use one of these. These are actually designed for silver work. And when you see pierced silver jewelry is made that way. So they'll start with a piece of bar and they'll tap out the design, and then they'll cut out all the cutouts with one of those saws. So that is what they're designed for. If you buy a better one, Axminster make a really nice piercing saw. If you're a proper tool nerd, they make really good stuff. And their one's really comfortable. It's got a nice, really comfortable handle, and it's easy to use. And you can get much finer work with a better saw because it's easier to grip and the blade doesn't snag so often. And having a slightly coarser pitch is a good thing for plastic because it clogs the teeth really quick. So polishing that, I'm going to run and grab something out of the cupboard and I'll come straight back. So I've got my tin of Brasso here. Image in the webcam because my webcam's upside down, but hey, it's Brasso. Just it's not Russian, look, it's not Brasovsky, it's actually Brasso. So what you get is wadding. I use the Brasso wadding because it's just convenient, and this stuff's really useful. It's basically a very similar formulation to T-cut, and you can use it for removing marker pen, you can use it for removing scratches, and you can use it for lots of different bits and pieces because it has a light cutting action. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to remove, if you see the marker line, watch the marker line disappear. So if you buy blasters that have had some idiot do that ray shading effect with a Sharpie, this will take it off. This is a CD marker, which normally can't be removed easily. And what I'm doing is I'm just rubbing it on there like that. Also, those of you with brass barrels or with the aluminium barrels, you can put this stuff through your pull through and just draw it through your barrel, and it will clean the inside of the barrel really nicely. And then you can run a clean rag through on the pull through on the other side, and that will help clean your barrel residue. And it takes oxidation off those cheap Chinese barrels. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and polish the back of this now so that it looks like a stock part. So I start by cutting it. This is the cutting polish basically, and you can use a wheel for this if you've got one, but I never bother. I always do it by hand. It's fairly easy. The other thing you can use to apply this stuff is you can use a swab to apply it. If you've got a liquid Brasso, you can apply liquid Brasso with a swab to little tiny areas. You can use it for lifting off things like we used to use it for lifting decals off of models or like printed detail that you didn't want. It's very handy for that. And Brasso and T-cut, similar stuff. So put the wadding away. And now all I need to do is I just need to get a little microfiber cloth. So I'll get a microfiber cloth now, and I'll go over this with a microfiber cloth and just lift that up. American market equivalents. If you look for a polish for brass and metal, T-cut, Simon sells a similar thing, a Simonizing solution in America, I think, which is kind of like T-cut. I don't know what the brand name is in the States, but T-cut is very similar to Brasso, and they do a brass polish. Any of those, like they've got a very unique smell, those, but those will work. You can also use cutting compound. You can also use those compounds for cutting, recutting car plastic lights. You know, when they go hazed and you have to cut them back, you can get those light restorations. They're good on plastic. Be careful because they will remove things like painted stripes. Sometimes they'll remove. Brasso also removes orange stripes. So don't put that on your painted stripes to take things off, and only put it on the natural plastic. Clean up. I worked up just now, and if it doesn't come up quite as shiny as you want, you have to do it again. You have to use a different cutting compound, or you'll just have to rub it some more. I just want to see if that's going to work. It doesn't always work. Sometimes even I have problems with this. Depends on the plastic and how hard you work the surface. Hopefully this will come up shiny. See, that's the thing about live TV. You can't test, you can't cheat. You just got to do it and hope it works. The other advantage about polishing this part, obviously, is that then any little abrasions on the surface, if you've taken them out, it's going to slide better, and it's a trigger. You know, you want a nice feel. So if you don't like having this mold line, for example, you can shave that off with a razor blade and then polish out the remainder, so you get a really nice smooth trigger. And I know some people like to do that. They complain about the trigger feel of a plastic trigger for some reason. Probably because it doesn't feel operaty enough for them. Getting gun syndrome. Everything must be metal. Right, now I'm going to hold that up and I'm going to angle the light so that hopefully, I don't know if it's going to be able to be subtle enough in this camera light. We'll see. I'm going to bring it right up to the camera so that I don't cheat, so nobody can accuse me of cheating. Right, here we go. It will just focus on that. It's a little bit blurry. Come on, camera. It was a very cheap webcam. There you go. See the light catching it there. And then where I cut it. So I'll give that one more go just to get it really shiny. So I'll take the wadding out again. And this wadding stuff comes with it comes with 2 different grades of material. There's like a kind of coarser, and then there's the soft woolly stuff. So you can tease it a bit. If you've got it on a yes, trigger feel is one of those things, isn't it? It's personally, if I don't like the trigger feel on my Nerf blaster, I just think, well, hey, it's easy enough to mod. It didn't cost me much money. I can always change the spring, or I could just live with that, or I can wear gloves, so I won't care. But I think there are some Nerf blasters that have particularly bad triggers. Now, you guys have got Snapfire 8s. So Snapfire 8s, I know that they were a big thing for a while, and they always had a horrible trigger. Oh, $700. Geez. That's one of those people where they've just clearly got money. Yeah, and filing is really good. And It's a Toy is also perfectly legit. That is always one of my favorite things about Nerf, is that it is a toy. And also, it's called Nerf modding, not Nerf buying parts. And I've always been keen on that. And I think that if you're going to call yourself a modder, you can't just fit kits. You have to make stuff. I mean, everyone has an individual preference, and I'm all for individual preference. And the way to make individual preference cool is to go and make something that then suits your play style. And that's the cool thing about, that's why in some ways I like the fact that we've now got to a point where it is easier to mod, in that you can buy the components for modding just like you would buy any other hobby product, which is great. You have to go to a few more specialist retailers like any small hobby, but you can actually go to a decent hobby store and you can buy some really great product. And that is a good thing. I don't miss the days when you had the, oh yeah, well, that's true, Greg. Equally, drop-in kit means spend ages working on it to make it work, but the parts all came in one box rather than from 3 different places. That is very true. I bought a drop spindle kit for my VW, and it took quite a lot of work to get it to fit. And I had to cut a load of things, and I had to mess about with a few other things. And it didn't come with any instructions because nobody ever fits it nowadays. Most VW people are rich enough that they just pay someone else to fix their bus. So it doesn't include much repairing. It includes mostly parts buying. But hey, it's hot rodding. If it was easy, everyone would do it. So there is a pretty much finished trigger now. And I don't think that is all that discernible from stock. I'll bring it up for you guys to see. So I think that there's a tiny little piece of crud caught in the corner. So I think that now, I think you'd be hard pressed to not see that was stock. Now, the other advantage about doing it this way is that unlike a PLA trigger or a printed trigger, you ain't got no lines. So you won't get any stickiness, and it'll all just fit stock in because it's a stock trigger. So there's the quick and dirty trigger mod. I kind of took it a little bit further than I would most times because I wanted to show you guys what's possible with just, and that didn't take us long, did it? You know, we're well under half an hour to make that. So I'm pretty pleased about that. Yeah, those companies that, yeah, with some drop-in kits where they might drop in, the best thing to drop them in is the nearest skip. That's the other thing we sometimes say about drop-in parts kits. Yeah, they can be very entertaining, can't they? But the good thing is that we've always had, I think, with the Nerf community, because it's so small, it's been very hard for people to make stuff that was really bad for any length of time, because the community is small enough that if 90% of the community doesn't buy a product, you've gone bust. So it is quite good in that it does discourage, and we're not big enough to discourage real big gouging. I know we've had some products that didn't live up to the hype train, but most of those hype train products, if you actually then went on and modded them properly, were perfectly usable. It's just that they weren't amazing out the box. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over the sanding of the shell. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with working on this as a whole. I showed you guys how it goes together. And at the moment, the cage and wheels in here is just the placeholder because I needed to make sure that it all lined up and that everything cleared. And you can see here that I've got a little bit of lining up work to do on the top there where I haven't finished cutting the plate. The plate's not quite cut back far enough. And I didn't bother correcting that. So when you attach my flat tops, what you do is you then just put just goes on the top like that. Plate just goes on. When it's all machine screwed in, you just put the screws in. It's hard to do this and film at the same time. And then they just get screwed down. And there we go, put that where you can see it. So you just put the screws in like that on the top plate. It just goes into the top. And they're just machine screwed in. And these are just standard, same sorts of things you see in everybody else's gear. There's nothing fancy about those. They're just a countersunk Allen head bolt, just a cap screw type thing. And they go in like that. I tend to put them all in loose first. These were just countersunk on the drill press. There was no like real fancy work on any of this. But my new method for to use a flanged I think it's an M4 bolt. It's a flanged M4 bolt, so it has the M4 nut on the bottom, and then there's just like a flange. It's like having a welded-in washer almost. And those, what I do for those now is I drill a hole. I think it's an 8.5mm hole in the shell, and then I turn it over, and then I use a spade bit to just make a flat pedestal on the back with a spade bit, with a 12mm spade bit, and then I put the screw in and then just bolt it in with Devcon, and that works really well. I put the nut in and Devcon it in place, and it's easier than trying to screw these in. What I found with these was that the threads didn't really give me much, and they were quite narrow. They were too thin, and so by the time I cut them down to go through just this 8mm of material, they didn't bite very much. So I was having to use quite a lot of Devcon anyway. So I kind of changed that. After I did this, I've changed those now. Now the hard part with these is getting the tack rail straight, and it's all right on something like this, which is just going to be a CQC type of thing. And what I found on my Pone Sniper Rapidstrike was that it's one advantage of 3D printing. I take my hat off to Alice's flat top kit because it is very precise. Obviously, in 3D printing, you get this, and it will all lay up right, and this will be perfectly parallel with the rest of it, but you obviously have to still stick it parallel. So my system means I mark the center line last and I try and drill the rail, but it doesn't always go straight. So on this blaster, it ended up being a little bit wonky. On the Pone Sniper, I discovered when I went to zero the scope that the rail was actually out by quite a long way, and I had quite a lot of work to do on the rail to get it all clean and get it to work. I just leave a couple of screws in here always to hold the shell together, because then you can work on the thing as a whole. Now I'll show you guys. I'll give you guys a little sneak preview of this, and you can type your opinion in the comments, and I'll show you what I was thinking about for this. So at the moment, my son wants the SMG, and he wants it to have it'll probably have a full-on hot rod paint job on it of some description. It might be elite blue metal flake. He didn't want the 3D flake. He wanted the standard metal flake with potentially like a big flame fade through, or a red flames with the blue elite blue pearl or candy. But one of the things I was looking at, I'm going to get the bag of bits. Right. I've got all the mock-up bits in here. So obviously this is the BS UK Mark 1 Rapidstrike front kit plate, which is now a really old design, and this one has seen better days in some respects. The print quality is not as good as some more modern designs, but I'm going to use it anyway because it'll give me a nice big orange front on there, and actually the orange is quite a good match for the Nerf orange if we put a piece next to it. Now that's a darker piece, but it doesn't look too weird with the barrel on. I could probably paint that, but I haven't decided about whether to paint that now. This was just something that I knocked up in my usual style. So what I was thinking about with this was, this is the bit that I haven't seen anybody do before. So you kind of get a sneak preview. Yeah, that's true, Greg. It's not wonky, it's artisanal. But that's rather bad on a scope. Artisanal sniper rifles equals get you killed. Right. Now, this hasn't been out for a while, so I've got to remember which way up this goes. Where did I make that? Does that go on the other side? I might have to turn this over. I've got to work out where I put it. Which way round did it go? It's been so long since I've made it, I've forgotten how it works. Okay, where does that go? Oh no, that might go on the other side. Right. Does that go that way? That goes that way. There we go. Right. Okay. So what was, if you guys remember that the vector kit, when it came out, the vector kit on the Stryfe. So I was thinking that I quite fancied a handguard type setup on this. And this was my mock-up design of that. And I was thinking about that as a shape. Except this would be in carbon effect acrylic. So what it is, it's acrylic sheet with carbon, that carbon look stuff put on the back, and it's 3D. So when you look at it, it looks like a three-dimensional piece of carbon. So you'd have the blue hot rod stripe, and then this fixed over this spot, or up here, potentially, up here smooth like that into it. I did think about going completely smooth into the top of the shell like that, and having a smooth piece right the way up. But I thought about using that to make a battery box, but actually it wasn't quite big enough. Yeah, it's a carbon fiber effect. It's not true carbon. It's like a carbon dip, but it's actually printed onto the back. If you look up 3mm acrylic carbon sheet, you can buy it and it looks just like carbon. I think it would probably look best like that, flat. And then what you'd have is you'd have this mad flames type and metal flake type stuff. And I'd lick the flames up along here and down. And then this would just be in shiny black carbon. And then these connecting pieces would be shiny black carbon with milled aluminium inserts to act as a spacer. So you can still get your hand in there. The only problem is that I thought about then one of Greenhouse's excellent grip extenders maybe, or maybe making a grip extender that came down just so that it would clear the bottom of your hand there. Because it's a problem if you've got a bigger hand. But at the time I made this, my son still had little boy hands. But in the 3 years it's taken me to build it, he's like tripled in size. And he now has great big man hands. So it may be that I'll end up making that. So that would be all carbon. All of those little pieces that are currently white would be carbon. So I'm thinking about doing that. Because what I'd be able to do is I would spray this matte black and the edge of this matte black, leave this in natural, because then when I bond it, it would bond in. And then obviously have an extended mag release, or just leave the stock one you could flick out. And that would kind of act as a magwell flare. And I could potentially fit a flare in there, but I don't think there's enough space. If you look at that, even with that being 3mm, not 5mm, you'd have struggle for space. But I thought that look would be really different, and I've not seen anyone else do that with a Rapidstrike, or with an SMG, because I wanted it to look different from Alice's. And so now that's pretty much would be the finished form of how that was going to look. Would be like that. So there's the finished form of that with the stock barrel, and then it's got one of my battery stocks, which is the same. I made Alice's one, and I shipped it with her stock when I made it. I think I shipped her a battery stock. And what I do is I hollow out the butt piece of the stock where that down piece of the stock is. I hollow that out, and then yeah, cardboard aided design is massive. We use it all the time. And actually the old school hot rod guys used it for everything. No hot rod guy used a computer in the 50s. Those guys that made the Barris Batmobile, made by lead, hand forming steel, and basically a gas welder and using cardboard templating. So somebody did a vector Rapidstrike. Was that full length though? And I bet he didn't use carbon. I bet he did something painted or black. But I was wondering whether I might shape that a little bit more so that it follows the shape. But I quite like the fact that at the moment I was going to use that edge as my Q edge on the back, so that followed this edge here, and then that was the edge that I cut the stuff on. Oh, he did a magwell. All right, he did a flared magwell type thing. Okay, that's interesting. Because I don't really keep up very often these days. I don't have time to spend hours looking on the internet for everything. So what I've got to do with the shaping of this, and what I thought I'd show you guys, is how I actually get the basic shape going. And all I do is I've got to work this curve down, and I want to work this curve so that it matches this curve. And actually, at the moment, if I touch that with the file, that is pretty much down. There's not a lot left to match that curve at the front. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to overfile, because then you'd only have to fill it back. And you can see here this horrible, ugly line between the... I'll bring it up closer so you can see it. Now, this always shows up in photography. If you want a free tip, if you want to see how horrible things are, photograph them in primer. This gap here. What I'm going to do to seal that gap up is I'm going to put a load of filler in onto the rough surface where I cut away the top here. I'm going to smear that with car body filler. And what you do is you coat this in Vaseline. And then you put the car body filler up against it and push. And then let the car body filler find its level. And then you pull it off. And then you take it away. And then you clean the Vaseline off afterwards. And then it won't stick. And that will stop it. So that's good. At least I won't be accused of copying somebody else. Nobody wants that. So I'll shape down here. And I'll just use my file to get my initial shaping. And once you see, I'll start to strike a bit of blue with the file. That means I'm getting down onto that edge. And I'm removing some of the glue there. And then what you've got to watch out for is scratching too much here. But you can take a lot of that out afterwards. So then what I come into is, once I've done that, I'll get some of my 120 grit out. And I'll cut that with my scissors, which I helpfully didn't put anywhere near me. Nope. What I'll do is I'll tear off the piece at the other end. This is where my missus is on the block. I always do, because I'm really anal about it. So I'll just fold it and tear it. Now, the downside about a torn edge is that it can actually give you an uneven sanding edge. If you're sanding filler with a torn edge, you can actually cut the filler out. So what I'll do is I'll go back to wrapping a block in the paper like that, core to it. And if you go into the pound store or dime store, they're about this long, they're about 15 centimeters, 6-inch bendable nail files. If you get those, they make great starting sticks for sanding. And then when they clog, you just wrap them in paper. And that's how I did the sanding on the Kardashnikov. That's how I got it so flat. So then I'll get my 120 and I'll work down the line. And I'll just keep working that line by hand. And it's gonna have struggle, but it's gonna be a bit wobbly, because it's gonna be trying to focus on the sanding. And I'll lift it up so that you don't get all the sanding noise. So I'll work all of that. I'll just keep blocking that. And what I'm trying to make this line here. I'm trying to make this line disappear. So there, you can see there where I've nearly made that line disappear now. And that's the line between the two layers on the top. Now, sometimes you'll get a low spot. Like here's a classic spot where I cut it and I didn't. So where I've got those low spots. Now, what I use for those is I put super glue in them, a little touch of super glue in them, and then I put some green squadron putty in them, and then I prise the top off when the putty's not quite hard, and that cleans those up. Or you can put squadron putty into these little lines from up here, and you just put a bit of squadron putty in and you can work it out. So I'll work those down. Now I've got about 5 minutes left. So I'm not going to go mad because I'm not going to get it all done. And then at the front here, I've got a line. I've got a bevel line on that. Let's just see if we can get that in the camera. So I've got a bevel line here at the front on there. And I'm going to try and lay this back a little bit so the bevel line's a bit more matching so that it looks like it's a similar angle to the other one. So to do that, I'm going to want a coarse cut again. So I'm going to have to get the file. I'm sure Nathan, who was here, would tell you that he's probably having his lunch, that body line is everything. If you've got body lines and you're trying to create a shell that looks like it was meant to be part of the same thing, following the body line that's already there, Hasbro gives you these nice clues in the molding. and then it's up to you to follow them. I'm probably going to end up with a small step here because I don't want to go too far back. Otherwise, I'll end up shortening my tack rail. Right, Nerf paint. Okay, I cheat, right? If I've got this factory orange, I know some people like to take it off. There's two ways you can do it. You can use one of those. Like Scotch-Brite type brushes, right? That will go on a drill on a low speed, and you can take it off with those. And a stripper wheel, they call them. They're not as much fun as they sound, unfortunately. You can use those, but you've got to be very careful that you don't go too hot because you'll melt the plastic. So you've got to watch your speed. You've got to have a variable speed drill, and I generally clamp it and hold it and then just run it off with that. But I also have a grip blasting cabinet, so I can cheat, stick it in the grip blasting cabinet. But 9 times out of 10, I don't paint over the original paint. I just paint over the top of it. I primer it. So to key it back in those rough areas, this is what you want, the Scotch-Brite pad. And I bought these just to show you guys because I thought, oh, I'll have time after I've shown. So you've seen the shaping process. Basically, I go through the file, then I go through blocks of various descriptions on the 120. And then when I've just got a few marks left from the file, after the 120 and it's polished, then the whole lot gets wet 240. These I shave off. So the logos, I'll use a razor blade and shave them off. And then I'll block the whole area with 120 block, with a nice little block, and just work it with a little block to get it really flat to hide the logo so there's nothing left. And then when I want to take these, I key them with the Scotch pad, because the beauty of the Scotch-Brite pad is that it gets right into all the little nooks because it's flexible. And what you can do is you want to get in like that, and you can really push the Scotch-Brite pad right in to the gap in the corner where you just can't get. I'll show you. I'll see if I can show you. You can see the difference between this and paper. So if I do this end piece with paper, there's a bit I've done with, there's a bit I've done here, and then I'll do another piece further up, and I'll try and get right in. See if you can see a difference. Right. So we look up. This is going to be really hard to get the camera to focus. So if you look here, there, look how far down the line that's gone. Yeah, the shininess, Adam, is the problem, and that normally causes fish-eyeing. But if you look there, you can see that that's gone right in, and there, I haven't quite got as close in as the, I've left a little bit more orange behind with that, and that flexible, it removes the shininess that Adam's talking about is this top surface there. And if you look now, that's completely dull. And look, you see how much that's taken onto it, look. And you can get this in coarse, medium, fine, and ultra fine. And you can use ultra fine for things like lacquer. If you want to key off lacquer and put another coat of lacquer on, if you use ultra fine, the swirl marks on ultra fine won't show up in the next clear. And also you can use ultra fine for, if you want to keep this paint, but you want to lacquer over it, you can use ultra fine to key it. And then fine, this is fine, the red, and then there's green, which is the more coarse. But yeah, you've got to get all of that shininess completely off. What you're aiming for is almost a flat surface with that, and you can still get a reaction in the primer. That is the problem with those paints. And if I get a reaction, I get pissed off with it. You can get this stuff called barrier coat. Sometimes that works. Barrier coat's what painters use when they've had enough. And if they're getting a lot of reactions, barrier coats are super inert paint that just gops over the top. But if you get really sick of it, really, you're going to have to use either a stripper wheel or sandblasting it. It's really, really easy. That takes it off. But yeah, these can be particularly bad. The orange, I think, is one of the worst ones. That really shinier orange is really difficult. But the Scotch pad is your best tool for that prep. And that does get right in there. And that will take the whole surface off. And it's the causes the problem. And anywhere where you get that horrible lemon peel, orange peel effect on the surface where the paint doesn't stick and you get those little pits in it, and it's really, really annoying. You can also use acetone. Some people use acetone to etch it off. But acetone's nasty stuff. Wear goggles when you use it and wear gloves when you use it. But you can get that. Nail varnish remover is a form of acetone, the cheap stuff. So yeah, that's what I'll do is I'll go over, and then I always use these when I've finished. I'll go over the whole thing with a Scotch pad, a fresh piece of Scotch pad, and just key it all really carefully with the Scotch pad, so that everywhere, this paint also is better keyed with a Scotch pad because it's really coarse and annoying. And that's another one that does tend to do. Right, now with the Digicam The way I remove the digicam is I use a 240 wet grip. I just use 240 wet paper, so that's this black stuff. I use the 240 wet paper and I sand the whole thing with wet paper. I don't use anything else. I just wet paper it off. And I could probably remove that in my grip blasting cabinet. I've never really tried. I ought to do a video on testing that. But it's really hard to film inside the grip blasting cabinet because you turn it on and it just fills with dust. So it's quite hard to see the process. But yeah, Adam's right. Sanding, and more sanding. I think Alice says that she does some of her sanding in the shower. So yeah, she goes and has a shower and saves water by doing some of her sanding if she's got a shell to do. So there's an extreme money saving measure for you that you can sand and shower at the same time. I used to sand in my bath, but I don't have a bath anymore, so I now have to use a tub. But I just get a big tub of water, you know, one of those storage tubs, and then I just use warm water and I use a 240 grit wet paper. You can use a 120 grit wet paper if you're really pissed off with digicam, but you can't get rid of the digicam easily. It's really, really annoying, and it is very, very boring. And also, wet sanding is a good way to remove the lines on PLA printed parts or on FDM printed parts. You just keep the sandpaper wet and just keep working it, because if you try and use the paper dry, you burr the surface and it all bobbles and it looks crap. So that's another free trick, that with wet paper, I only use automotive paper now. I'll sometimes use the oxide paper for filler shaping. I'll use oxide paper, but for paint prep, always the auto paper and the Scotch pad. Those are the two key weapons in paint prep. And then once it's fully wet and it's been wet papered, yeah, you don't want it like pouring, but yeah, keep watering, keep getting the sludge off. As the sludge builds up on the paper, keep it wet and wipe over with a sponge, a clean sponge, the surface of the blaster to remove the little micro bits of plastic. The downside about doing that is that you do put microplastics into the environment, and if you're concerned about that, if you pour your water through a fine filter like a coffee filter, you'll take some of the microplastics out, your wastewater. So you can filter your wastewater. Right, the grip scales on the Stryfe, the ones that are down the middle, the easiest way to remove those is you could use a coarse sanding disc on a slow speed on your drill, or you can I just get a razor and I shave them like that, or a nice coarse hand file. I know it sounds kind of trite, but you can really work it in there and it doesn't block up. It won't look. I can just take that off. You see, that plastic just comes off. It doesn't block up the file too bad, and that is a really good way of getting the scales off the Stryfe grip, is to do that. The other thing you can do with those scales is you can key them up. So instead of taking them off, you just use them, just put filler over the top. If you use car body filler, which is a proper lightweight epoxy, polyester filler, sorry, that will stick to those. As long as it's keyed, it'll stick in there. So you can roughen it with a drill brush, wire brush, or with a rough sandpaper, and then skim over it and then sand it flat. So you can then use it to build the grip out a little bit, and that looks quite cool. I did a Stryfe for somebody where I shaved those squares off, and yeah, I just used a razor and shaved it in the end. But I could have used a good like first cut file. Anybody else got any more questions? Because I'm pretty much there with the stream now. If you've got them, get them in the chat. Awesome. I will do another stream. I'll probably do a stream every 2 weeks. Pirate Johnson, I don't know what that means. So yours got your comment got caught. So I have no idea what that means. So you're not going to get to see it, I'm afraid. Oh, I'm going to Foam Fest. Yes, I will be at Foam Fest. I have a stall at Foam Fest. I'll have all of my builds there. I'll have all my rigs there. Adam, you've been a really good student, and also you've taught me loads of things, and you also taught me a shit ton about perseverance. Even on my worst day, I was able to think to myself, hey, if I can't do this and Adam can manage to do this with all his other issues that he has with doing things that I find really easy, like driving, if Adam can do it, then there's no reason for me to sit here going, oh, it's so hard. I really don't like doing another flat top. So you taught me not to be a whiny bitch and just to get on with it, mate. So it was a two-way street. But yeah, if anyone wants to come see me, I'll be at Foam Fest, and I'll be there the whole of the day at the actual convention bar. I am not playing any of the games because I have to go at about 3 p.m. on the Sunday because I have to get my son back in time for a reasonable time for school on Monday morning. We're coming up on the Friday night, but I'm staying at my mum's because I'm too tight to pay for a hotel, and she has a spare bedroom and she's a good cook. So I'll probably go and stay at my mum's, and then I'll come over on Saturday for the whole day, and I'll be exhibiting. So you'll get a chance to see me. I will probably wear a few of my more daft outfits as well. So you'll get a chance to see things. We've been planning our theme. There's a possibility of a special one-off theme blaster, and I may have a new release as well. I might build something just for Foam Fest. If my van holds up the work that I've been doing, and I get the van ready for Foam Fest in time, then I will do a special blaster build as well. So yeah, I'll do another live stream probably in 2 weeks. I'll schedule it as soon as I get time. It's been a real pleasure to meet you all and talk to everybody, and to catch up with you as well, Adam, because it's been ages since we've actually been able to sit down face to face. So I don't know who Martha Stewart is. So unfortunately, that's a completely lost on me. So yeah, Jomo, good to see you as well, mate. And I hope the dogs are keeping you busy and active and fit and not tearing your house to pieces, buddy. Have a good evening, all of you. And I will see you again in a couple of weeks. And if anyone has suggestions, message me on BritNerf for suggestions of what you want to see me mod next time. Cheerio. And thank you all for coming.